This is Keep Up. I'm your host, Cynthia Dill. It's Wednesday, March 5th, 2025. I'm in my Cape Elizabeth studio. It's good to be back. Maybe you saw President Trump's address to the joint session of Congress last night. I watched it, all 2 hours of it, and I was particularly interested when he reiterated the new, or at least somewhat new, official policy of the United States that there are two genders, male and female. Henceforth, that's the official policy of the Trump administration. And, it's interesting, in March is Women's History Month, and in Maine, instead of really recognizing the contributions of women, observing what women have done and the potential of what we can do in the future, Maine is working on really erasing women altogether. And what I mean by that is there's a bill going around, the Equal Rights Amendment, and it's interesting to me that it's all Democrats who are sponsoring it. And I typically think of Democrats as feminists, but unfortunately, today's Democrats have taken the feminine out of feminists, just like they've taken the women out of women's sports. And what I mean by that is we have now embedded into our Maine law, thanks to activity that took place in the 129th legislature, a definition that I think is just unadulterated nonsense. And that's not a legal term, but I am a lawyer, and I do carry with me my constitutions around everywhere. And I just like to remind people that when it comes to gender and rights, and sexual orientation, and we have the United States Constitution, 14th Amendment, guarantees that no state shall deny any person equal protection of the laws or due process. So we have the 14th Amendment in federal law that protects people's equal rights under the law. And in Maine, the Article 1, Section 6A prohibits discrimination on the basis of it says no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall be denied the equal protection of the law, nor be denied the enjoyment of that person's civil rights, or be discriminated against in the exercise thereof. So under both constitutions, Maine and the United States Constitution, there are already provisions that provide for equal rights to all persons. And the effort has been federally and locally to add to the Constitution, both at the federal level and at the state level, an equal rights amendment. And at the federal level, it's been sort of dead in the water, but people still every once in a while, take it out of the closet and give it a shake. But the equal rights amendment that's proposed at the federal level would say that essentially equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state on account of sex. Okay, that's basically it in a nutshell. You can't be on account of sex is the key phrase there. And sex isn't defined in the statute, but it's generally understood as a term to mean, as it is defined in Black's Law Dictionary, which is my go-to, for just simple definitions when it comes to legal terms. Gender is not in Black's Law Dictionary, by the way, at least not my edition. But sex is, and sex is defined as the sum of the peculiarities of structure and function that distinguish a male from a female organism, the character of being male or female. Now, in Maine, it had been the case that there were efforts to amend the Maine Constitution to include an equal rights amendment. And up until just recently, the efforts to change the language mirrored the language that was in the federal equal rights amendment. In other words, no discrimination on the basis of sex. But that's not the case anymore. Now, everywhere it used to say on the basis of sex, it says on the basis of actual or perceived race, color, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, age, physical or mental disability, ancestry, or national origin. Okay, so my belief is that definition just erases women. It doesn't include women. And once women are no longer defined, then women are no longer entitled to play on sports teams for women and no longer entitled to single-sex safe spaces like prisons and restrooms and locker rooms and And so that's why I'm opposed to the Equal Rights Amendment in this month of March, Women's History Month, because I think it's anti-women. And so Trump says there's two genders, and two is better than zero, which is what we have now in Maine. And I'm going to say now why we have zero gender in Maine. We can thank the 129th legislature of the state that was dominated by Democrats. The majority leader was Matt Moonen, who's the same, a very nice person, all good intentions, was the executive director of Equality Maine, I believe, as well as the majority leader. And that year, the Human Rights Commission sponsored a bill that just included expanding the definition of sexual orientation in the Human Rights Act, right? We have the Maine Human Rights Act that sort of expands on and adds additional protections above and beyond the Constitution, and provides employment discrimination protection, and provides for protection from discrimination in housing, in education, in public accommodations. All these things I support. My whole life I've supported them. I got an award from the Disability Rights Center. I brought my own case based on gender discrimination like 30 years ago. So I believe in the principles of anti-discrimination. What I don't believe in is this concept of gender identity and gender expression, and I don't think adding it to the law does anything to protect us. In fact, it takes away freedom. It takes away my freedom. It takes away my identity. And that's why I'm opposed to it. But how it happened was in the 129th legislature, the Maine Human Rights Commission came to the Judiciary Committee and said, well, the Maine human rights definition is not a model of clarity. Now, granted, there was no investigation or any problems. There hadn't been a heightened increase of cases, but it said many people are not aware that coverage under the Maine Human Rights Act based on gender identity is nested in the sexual orientation definition. This is largely because, as many advocacy groups and parties have pointed out, gender identity is not a type of sexual orientation. Gender identity refers to who a person is, while sexual orientation refers to who a person is attracted to. So there we go, off to the races. There's a bill to the Judiciary Committee. Now, in the 29th legislature, as I said, the Democratic majority leader is also the executive director of Equality Maine, and now Secretary of State Jenna Bellows was on the Judiciary Committee. So they heard this this bill 1701 to clarify various provisions of the Maine Human Rights Act, which added for the first time this concept of gender identity to the Maine Human Rights Act. Now, keep in mind, there's no definition of gender in the Maine Human Rights Act. It's undefined. So all of a sudden we have this definition of gender identity, and it's mostly, it's an idea that is totally pushed by Equality Maine, okay? And that's their job. It's an activist group to, press for causes they believe in. And my personal view is that once the Obergefell case came down in the United States Supreme Court that allowed for same-sex marriage, on a wonderful campaign of love, it just cleared the field of issues, because at that time everybody is equal, right? It doesn't matter who you don't have to wear your sexual orientation on your forehead any longer. You don't have to overshare about who it is you like to have sex with. You can just tell people if you're single or married and identify who your spouse is, and that would be enough. So that decision really dried up the landscape for people whose life depends on having a cause and raising money on causes. And this is one of them. So I think personally that this trans issue just sort of bubbled up as just another thing to work on, because there's nothing else to do, because there wasn't a whole army or audience or parade of people who came to the legislature. In fact, it was just a couple of interest groups. And I'll just give you some, this is the testimony from Equality Maine about what gender identity is. Gender identity is the innermost concept of the self as male, female, a blend of both, or neither. How individuals perceive themselves and what they call themselves. It can mirror what a person was assigned at birth or be completely different. Sexual orientation, on the other hand, is inherent or immutable, enduring emotional, romantic, or sexual attraction to other people. And then it goes on, someone can be transgender but also be gay, straight, bisexual, asexual, or a whole host of other sexual identities that exist. So that's why we need to have sexual identity in the Human Rights Act, this person testified, because it would clarify something for somebody. In my mind, it's unadulterated bullshit. It's just a concept that has been imposed on people with no science. No, I mean, it should not be in the law because we don't have a definition of gender, and it completely dilutes women. On the heels of this law passing, 1701, all of a sudden, the Human Rights Act is scoured of the word woman and replaced with a person. For instance, the Pregnancy Act, okay, an act to protect pregnant workers. This is something sponsored by my own senator, Senator Carney. I can't believe it. It replaced the word woman in this. The law is specifically addressed to prevent pregnant women from being discriminated against. But instead of using the word woman, this law, on the heels of the gender identity adding to the Human Rights Act, is takes out woman and says a person, it shall be unlawful employment discrimination violation of this act for an employer to treat a pregnant person who is able to work in a different manner from other people. So this concept of gender identity made its way into the law. It wasn't debated. There wasn't any scientists. It was a party line vote. And then, on the heels of adding the gender identity to the Human Rights Act, it got added everywhere else. So we have now a law that is, in my mind, so vague and offensive because, like I said, it doesn't recognize women as being real. It doesn't recognize women and girls as being real. It takes away my freedom. It takes away my rights, and that's why I'm opposed to it. And that's why I can't believe that this proposed equal rights amendment is going to be on the ballot. The Democrats hope that the Equal Rights Amendment is going to be on the ballot. And I mean, if Janet Mills is going to run against Susan Collins for Senate, that's going to be a tough issue for her to defend. Who's running for governor? Shenna Bellows. Is this going to be a winning issue in the 2nd Congressional District, that Shenna Bellows no longer thinks women exist, that women's sports teams should be opened up to men and women? There's a lot of work that has to be done. And one thing that could help, in my view, is that we could go back to the drawing board of the Maine Human Rights Act and think carefully whether we want to include a definition of gender identity. Okay, this it's pseudoscientific nonsense without defining gender, because how can you have a gender identity if you don't have any accepted concept of gender? Now, I get people who don't like a binary choice. They think it's too much. But as I said, at least under Trump, there is this thing called women, whereas right now, under Maine law, there's been an identity theft. It's a gender scam. It's in the name of progress, but it actually takes away women's rights. That's why I'm opposed to it. That's why you should be opposed to it. And this isn't about discriminating against people who are transsexual, because they already have rights. They have rights, but now they have special rights, because now, just like the abortion issue, activists looking for causes and money drag in the insurance industry, drag in the medical industrial complex. So now this gender affirming care that's needed for this diagnosis of gender dysphoria, right? We're led to believe that transgenderism is caused from gender dysphoria or gender incongruence, and that's an illness, or it's a condition that needs to be treated with healthcare. And in fact, it's such an important condition. Apparently, it's such a critical condition that we now have a law that says gender affirming care is a right. So think about that. You've got some kids on their parents' insurance, and they have a right to gender affirming care when their parents don't have a right to eyeglasses or a hearing aid. It's ridiculous. So it's a gender mania scam here in Maine that's depleting women and girls of rights and freedom, and we need to go back to square one and look at our laws and see, do we really need to tack on to what is already in print, right, in the Constitution, that has produced a society that is more free than any in the history of the world? Do we really need to lob onto it this gender identity, gender expression as some right, someone's perceived, I mean, feelings over facts? This is not, this is gender identity and gender expression and getting it into the Human Rights Act. And it's something that sort of um, came from an activist group with intentions, with good intentions, right? The idea is that there's going to be more equality, more freedom, but we got to be careful what we wish for. There are consequences to these laws, and I think we're heading down a path where we have less and less freedom. So stick with women, and I would say oppose the Maine Equal Rights Amendment. Tell Democrats to get back to the drawing board. Put the feminine back in feminist, okay? Put women back in women's sports. Simple. All right, that's it. Take care.